Phil, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Hi,
You,
Wendy.
hi, you have such a graceful presence, and each time you speak, you have such careful consideration, and you are intentional, and your thoughts are so well articulated. And I can't say this enough to you. Tell us about your time as president of ACEP, some things that you've seen as far as change, contributions, and transitions.
Well, thank you, Mandy. I think I'd like to say something first about how I see ACEP as being so special, if I may, because I think that's a backdrop to everything else. So, um, when I first attended an ACEP conference sometime in the early 2000s, I was really astonished. It seems the conferences seem such magical events where amazing connections and amazing experiences took place, and really the kind of people who were drawn to ASEP seemed quite astonishing. And I think most people who have been part of ASEP for some time understand what I mean when I say that it's like a gathering of the tribe, a gathering of people from all around the planet who feel some kind of connection, and we recognize one another, and there's an energetic resonance between us all, and it's like a home for all manner of people who are engaged in very serious work to do with knowing that there is something beyond the material realm, something beyond the material biology of the body and the brain, that we are in some way spiritual and energetic beings in a physical form, and that there is a need to bring all these different levels and dimensions together in a way that is responsible, so professionally responsible, that we are aiming to do good work for our clients and for one another, that we are treating our clients and one another ethically, that we are endeavoring to be truthful and scientific, as well as taking account of all the other factors that are important, and somehow keeping that balance, balancing all these different interests and vectors. So we are a collective that, and I just jotted down a list here of the different kinds of activity that people in ASEP will do. So there's psychotherapy, there is physics and metaphysics, and there's neuroscience, there's spirituality, there's biology, there's epigenetics, there's concern with the meaning and purpose of life, there's parapsychology, there's energy healing of all kinds. And somehow ASEP provides a home in which all these different practitioners can find a place. And somehow a balance is kept that allows these groups to work together, each accountable to our own professional associations outside of ASEP, and yet having a place within it.
David, so nice to be with you. There's so much that we could talk about. But the first thing I want to ask you is about your presidency and the starting and being a founding father of ACEP. What was going through your mind at the time? Why ACEP? Why now? Tell us about that time.
Sure. Well, the first thing that was going through my mind is I don't want to do this. I do not want to be ASEP's first president. After that, now we're fast forwarding to 1998. Dorothea Hover Kramer got in touch with me and basically said the same thing. It's really time for the family of energy psychology methods, the field of energy psychology, to come together, because as long as all of these innovators and practitioners and this small handful of researchers that existed at that time are all operating in their own little silos, we can't really establish credibility for the field, nor can we create community to support one another. And so I said to her, "You're right. It really does need to happen now. Is now, meaning 1998, is the time for us to do this." And then Dorothea said, well, here's the thing. You're the one with the background to serve as ACEP's first president because your organizational development background, your leadership background is what is needed to get this baby off the ground. And being, for any of our viewers who are versed in the Enneagram, being an Enneagram 1, one of the things that motivates Enneagram 1s is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So under duress, I said yes.
So yeah, it was an exciting time. Yeah, exciting, conflicted. Tell us about your role with Dorothea and Greg and the other early leaders. What was kind of the thought process? What were you feeling at the time?
Was at that time considered at best a novel and experimental method, and at worst, it was considered quackery. And all of us who were involved in energy psychology back then, including you, we knew this was not snake oil, that there was really something here. And so what Dorothea and I had extensive conversations about what the culture was in ACEP that we wanted to nourish. And so the culture revolved around, first of all, us being impeccably ethical and high quality professionals and having a great fun time with each other too. In
Yeah.
other words, as a friend of mine from many, many decades ago said, it's all much too serious to be serious about. And we wanted to inject into the culture that both and of taking the work really seriously and taking ourselves really lightheartedly.
Mhm.
So that was one guiding principle in crafting the culture. The other main guiding principle in crafting the culture was that Dorothea and I did not like siloing among professionals. We didn't like the pecking order. We wanted there to be none of that siloing. We didn't want to ignore ethics issues around legitimate, appropriate scope of practice. That of course we wanted to emphasize. But in terms of our group's better than your group, we did not want that in this organization. So that was another key cultural piece. And then the last piece, which was less about culture and more about design, was that we wanted to make sure that the organization was attending to professional development and innovation and research and humanitarian efforts and credibility through research, et cetera, and good media relations and all of those kinds of things. And is that answering your question?
Yeah, yeah, it's a beautiful answer. And you mentioned Dorothea, and a lot of us were very fortunate to know her and be in her presence in ASAP. But most of the people coming into ASAP now didn't have a chance to meet her. Can you tell us, everybody out here, a little bit about her and
Sure,
what her role was?
sure. Well, Dorothea was one of those Renaissance people who walked the walk of being unharmed by the unacceptable. So Dorothea grew up in Germany during World War II.
Mhm.
Where she lived was bombed out. It was horrifically traumatic. You know, people around her were taken away to the gas chambers, all of that kind of stuff. So Dorothea grew up as a very um, severe trauma survivor, but she didn't walk that way. She was joy and lightheartedness. And yes, of course, like many of us, including me, she could be really intense. And she still had a humor about her and a lightheartedness and an indefatigability where she was not going to be damaged by the unexpected or the unacceptable even. On top of that, she when I say she was a Renaissance person, she painted. She was a concert level pianist. So she was spread between all of her creativity and her nursing background. She was a clinical nurse specialist, and then later became a psychologist. She was also one of the developers of the Healing Touch training program. So when we came together, my primary expertise was in meridian-based treatments energy oriented, speaking about the energy world. And Dorothea's primary orientation in the energy world was chakra based treatments and some biofield as well. And so we realized that from an organizational development perspective, that we had a real problem on our hands in naming ACEP, because we wanted to make sure that what was built into the name made it clear that we were embracing all of the dimensions of the human vibrational matrix, of which there are quite a few, but the most well-known of those are the meridians, the chakras, and the biofield. And that's how we ended up with this unwieldy and, for us, unsatisfying name that was utilitarian rather than aesthetic, called the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology.
So many points that you could speak to, but maybe let's start with the history of energy psychology and ACEP.
Okay, let's see. I could go BA, which is before the conferences, before the ACEP, before ACEP. Okay, let's say 1977. I went into private practice. I was working with NLP, with Ericksonian hypnosis, client-centered therapy, blah, 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 blah. And I got bored at one point, and I found this, I heard about this approach. I read an article about tapping, and I thought it was kind of bizarre, but I checked it out, and I started finding that it was very effective for some reason, even though there was no research supporting it. I got in touch with Roger Callahan. He and I became very close, and I studied his approach, and I studied the roots of it. Okay, so I got very obsessed with the whole thing, and so at one point I become certified by Roger Callahan. So anyway, with his approval, I went around and I created these couple workshops. One was called Rapidly Resolving Traumatic Memories, and the other one was called Recipes for Rapid Change. Interestingly, in Pittsburgh, I met Greg Nicosia. He had come to my first workshop in the Pittsburgh area, and Greg came up, and I said, Greg, do you have something that a trauma or something bothers you? And he says, yes. And I think it was something about somebody a friend of his who had died in an accident. And so I had him standing up there, and I had him think about it. I muscle tested him. He was very weak when he did it. And I said, no, think about the situation. And then I had him do this. I had him tap his eyebrow and under his collarbone. So I had him do. Okay. I said, what do you think now? And he said, I think it bothers me less. So let's do a little more of that. So this is all eyebrow, under collarbone, which is bladder meridian, kidney meridian. Next thing you know, he says it seems very distant, and everybody's, some people are appalled and some people are amazed. Later, Greg got in touch with me because he then went and studied with Callahan. Actually, 6 people from this one workshop that I had taught went to study with Callahan. So anyway, Greg got in touch with me and he says, why don't we even take it further? And so we put our money together, and we got a advertising person, and we started advertising in the Psychotherapy Networker and different APA Monitor and so on. And so we went around the country, So somewhere along the way, I started meeting all these different people, some of the people that we meet, and Greg, I think Greg taught him first, and then I taught him, was the Grudemeyers, okay, with David and Rebecca. So they got very interested in this. They decided to have this big conference in Las Vegas. And Kate Sorensen calls me, and she says, we're doing this conference, and I wonder if you would be willing to come and do the keynote, because after all, you named the field, you wrote the book. And because I had written the book, Energy Psychology, okay, which gave a name to this approach and related approaches that I felt all had roots in energy in some way. There was kind of disruption in energy in the body's energy system, and this somehow put things back together by combining both clinical psychology ideas and ideas from acupuncture, meridians, and so on. And so at that conference, David and Rebecca and Dorothea Hover Kramer, they had proposed ACEP, the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, at Greg's recommendation that he kind of stirred them to get doing this thing. And so that started developing. That eventually took over the conference, and then things kept growing and growing and growing.
Okay, so I was the president from 2004 to 2006. So it was very early on in the beginning years of ACEP. And for me, my goal as a trauma therapist, especially when I was seeing all the cool things that were happening with trauma and the healings that were happening, was to bridge the energy work into mainstream psychotherapy. So I really wanted to get what we knew and what we were experiencing into regular therapy. So that more and more people, more and more clinicians would know about it. So we had the conference was, I would say, our big promo marketing thing, where we had all these different versions of energy psychology. We had Seymour Matrix, it was called at the time, now it's called AIT. We had Tapas acupressure technique. We had TFT, we had EFT, we had like ABC, we had guided self-healing, we had HBLU, we had all these different developers. And we were so excited to be together because we were doing energy work. And frankly, that was rather weird back then, even though we think it's weird now, but like back then it was really weird. So my biggest challenge as the president is, how do I get this seen by leaders in the psychotherapy field? That was what I was at. So a few of the things I did. One was I reached out and actually did some training for Bessel van der Kolk, who at the time was promoting EMDR. And so he was already on the fringe back then. And so trying to bring him, and we brought him to ACEP's conference, and we got him a little bit involved in, you could tap on your face and do some eye movements, and trauma would be healed, and people were getting better, and the flashbacks were stopping, the nightmares were stopping. It was such an exciting time. And then another person who we brought in was during this time was Bella Ruth Napperstack, who was doing guided imagery work, and she was a leader in the forefront of she had written Invisible Heroes, which was a trauma book. And so we got her in, and we started to begin to move energy psychology into this arena. It was just such an exciting time to meet new people, to bridge new people, to be welcoming, to really be welcoming to all the different ideas that were coming together at this time.
What would you like to see for the future of ACEP?
Well, I just know for my own future, let me say it this way. I just know for myself, for me, learning energy psychology was just totally revolutionized everything that I was doing. But it came to a point in my career where something was missing, something bigger. Several traumas had happened, things had happened, and I just didn't have answers to questions. And it wasn't until I really began to explore the spiritual domain of things, of why do these things happen, and why do good things happen to bad people? Why? The why question, And it's in integrating of that and soul and fragmentation now of soul, of how the soul fragments in trauma, and then how to bring all that back and bring consciousness back, in integrating the truth and the fullness of who we are. So I would love to see energy psychology merge with spiritual psychology. And for me, that's the future of it all. And so that would be my dream for energy psychology.
Anything else you'd like to add for this historical document in the making? Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I agree. Those were the things I really wanted to share. Other than the only other thing I would share is I'm so grateful for the foresight of David and Rebecca and Dorothea, and how they created an organization, a safe place where we could come together, and and the power of community, the power of an organization. There's that saying, if you go alone, you'll go fast. And I like to go fast, but if you go together, you'll go further. And that's what they brought when they created this. And so I hope we always stay together in that mindset of togetherness and community, and supporting each other for the greater good.
But how did you even get sort of taken in to leadership? How did ACEP find you? And yeah.
Okay. So actually, there's a story I love to tell, which is that I was at a presenter's reception one year. I guess I did present a couple of times, and that's what I did. And Michael Galvin was talking at the presenter's reception, and he made a comment about how everybody should take a turn serving on the board. And I said, well, not me, because I don't have anything to contribute to the board. And that was certainly my perception of myself at that time. And then some years went by, and I was asked to join the board, and I was like, well, okay, I guess I could try this. And got involved. I was on a number of committees and have been for a bunch of years. And then it was kind of funny because it came time to figure out, well, Carol Stewart and I were talking about she was president. We were talking about who would be president after her. And then she sent me an email and she said, oh, I think it should be you. And I sat at my computer and just literally laughed. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. And I wrote to her back and I said, well, no, it clearly shouldn't be me because I'm no good at schmoozing with people, and I'm no good at standing up in front of a group and talking. And, I can't do this, that, and the other thing. And she emailed me back and she said, well, yeah, it's true. You can't do any of those things. But you're good at this, this, and this, And I thought, well, I actually am good at this, this, and this. And I thought, and I get along really well with Bob. And Bob can do all the things I can't do. And it's going to be somebody who's on the board. And I looked at the list of who was on the board and I thought, nobody has the whole package. Nobody can do all that stuff. So I guess I could. And then it turned out to be a whole lot of fun. And I did a way better job than I thought I would have. And I say all this because I'm not sure who'll be listening to this, but whoever it is, we could use you too. And everybody could take their turn on the board, and who knows what will happen for you. So that's how it started. And then I ended up just being around for like forever.
So it sounds like very humble beginnings to what turned into you having a major impact with ACEP and the development committee. Tell everyone about that.
Really what had happened was that I got so tired of there being so much time during the year when we really couldn't ask Bob, and we had Leslie then too still, to do hardly anything because they were so busy with the conference, and that's all they had time for. And I finally was thinking, we need more money so we can have more staff so we can get more done. And eventually it got started. And I just looked today at who was at that first meeting, and Raya Key was there, and John Freedom helped get her in. He's the one who passed messages back and forth, and and I was there, and a few other people who aren't there anymore. And none of us, again, knew anything about fundraising. And actually, it was fascinating to me because I view myself as somebody who has pretty much no imagination. I'm not creative. And the day after our first meeting, that following day, an entire fundraising campaign came to me, along with an image, a graphic. And it was, some of people listening will know, it was called the Plate is Full campaign. And the idea was that there was a plate, and the idea was we would have this graphic, and on the plate would be everything we were currently doing. And then off the plate would be all these things we really wanted to do, but we couldn't because our plate was full. And so we were asking people to pledge however much they charged for a client hour. We were asking them to pledge that much a month to the Plate is Full campaign so that we could make our plate bigger and start doing more of these things. And it all popped into my head. And it was clearly because this group had met and started this container. And back in that time, and I checked, this was, so I started my presidency 10 years ago. And that was the year we started the development committee. And before the development committee started, we used to send out one end of the year fundraising message every year, and we would receive like about $3,000 in donations, and that was pretty much it for the year. And the development committee, filled with people who don't have a clue how to fundraise, has been able to kind of change the culture of ACEP so that there's much more of a culture of giving. So this past year we raised over $75,000 And that's, what we've been doing. It's been growing. And so I feel really, really good about the Humanitarian Committee and the Development Committee, and that impacts everything that ACEP can do going forward. So, yeah, I don't know.
Good. Yeah. Do you have any hopes for ACEP for the future?
Yeah, well, my biggest hope is for the field of energy psychology, which I think, we are the representative of that. And I always look at hypnosis. So hypnosis is this wildly successful technique that most people don't use, don't trust, don't do much with. It just has not ever fulfilled what I think is its potential. And I don't want that for energy psychology. For energy psychology, I want it to really be a household word. I want everybody, all mental health professionals, to be trained in energy psychology. It'll be a good fit for some of them and not a good fit for others. So not that everybody has to use it, but everybody ought to know about it. And that it should just be common knowledge that there's this incredible set of tools in this field and that people can use it. And so my hope for ACEP is that we just get, bigger and stronger and better all the time, so that we can continue to increase its spread, in the US and throughout the world.
So when I was asked to do these interviews, the first thing I thought of was you and how you came to ACEP and your dream that you had. And a lot of us that know you well know about this, but tell everyone else about your vision and your dream.
Well, sure. I've been blessed with visions of things that come to be. It seems like the visions also have like the task that you're going to spend a good deal of your life doing. So, yeah, I mean, I had been introduced to energy psychology by Fred Gallo, and I went out to study with Roger Callahan out in Palm Springs. And the first night I was there, I woke up having this dream, which made me think I was, somewhat grandiose delusional. Because in the dream, it seemed like I was the teacher and a leader of an army of energy healers. And here I'm just like starting to learn about energy and, study with Roger. And yeah, and so in that dream, I was a teacher and leader of army of energy healers, and my students were removing perturbations from people one at a time. And each time they did that, it removed the perturbation, not just from that person, but from the overriding field of thought energy that governs our species. And suddenly we reached a tipping point where the entire human species morphed to a higher level of consciousness, which had a lot to do with being able to use our, let's say, psychic powers or gifts. And so that things changed, because if a whole lot of people could see auras, it'd be really hard for the politicians to be lying to us, for example. And so I just followed that dream, and it unfolded.
What would you say is important about ACEP as an organization?
Well, I think to me, one of the most important things is really in the name. It's an Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. And to me, what that means is that we're open to encompassing a wide variety of approaches to energy healing. And there's, we had the alphabet soup of them, and I imagine there'll still be more and more and more as years go by. And the other aspect of comprehensive energy psychology has to do with the fact that it's not just one energy system based. It's basically, we use the three major systems, biofield, chakras, and meridians, and they do different things. And by using them and interacting with them, you learn basically what works well in what kind of situations. It's not that you can't use any of them to treat anything. You could use the biofield approaches, just biofield alone, to treat anything you want to treat, or you could just use chakras, or you can use meridians, but they really do different things, and they have sort of special, they each have their own specialties. For me, meridians have more to do with emotions. Chakras change more immediately physical body structures, and the biofield is what all the energy coming into us passes through our different energy bodies. So that's what makes ACEP so special. It's welcomes pretty much everyone, whether you're a psychologist or not. If you're in the field and you're a professional, we want to be able to share what we know with you and learn from you. And I think that's what ACEP does and does best.
What advice would you have for future EP clinicians or the next gen generation coming up?
Well, get the children using it. A number of my patients have gone out and bought tapping books for their children. I have comic books for children, but I would love to see this being used, in simple like an EFT kind of thing, just to teach children in kindergarten so that they have a tool that they can effectively use to help self-regulate. I mean, especially in the way that the world is today. I just saw that leading cause of death in children in the United States is firearms. That's staggering that you would grow up with that kind of a reality. And to have that, I often thought biofeedback would be taught to children when they were in like preschool or kindergarten. I used to do that and it worked really well with hyperactive kids. So now my dream is that I guess people would be able to use this from the time that they're young, that we would work towards integrating these techniques into everyday life. There's certainly the professional, level for doing therapy with really hard trauma, but people can do tremendously good psychotherapy in a sense for themselves and their thoughts and emotions if they'd simply learn to use that. And the other thing I would say is, well, be open to what you see and be kind. Yeah. When you care about the people and your intentions are in the right place, miracles do happen. And they happen pretty regularly in this business, which is kind of amazing. Yeah.
Dr. Lynn, I've known you for a long time. You've been involved with ACEP for many years. And I remember you starting in certification when I was kind of starting in education back then. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with certification and your journey with certification to this point still.
Well, if I may, I'd like to start with actually how I became involved in ACEP. The person who was my business partner at the time went to the very first ACEP conference in 1999 and was bowled over by it. So she came back, figuratively grabbed me by the lapels and said, Lynn, you have got to see this stuff. You've got to learn this stuff. It's going to be standard of care in 5 years. She was a little off on the timeline, but to shut her up for peace, I agreed to check out the next available energy workshop, which happened to be Asha Clinton's first 3-day matrix workshop, which is now, of course, AIT, because it was held in Atlanta. So I went grudgingly and skeptically. And so I'm sitting there in the audience, just kind of, oh, yeah, right. And then I won't go into how, but as it happened, she was not working on me, but I was still sitting in the audience, but I experienced a transformation. I experienced an energy clearing right then and there. And in fact, 15 years of trauma from my clinical training was just gone. Now, I'm a trauma specialist and I had worked on that a lot, and I had not been able to completely clear it. And now it was gone. That got my attention, especially because I was raised as a scientist. And if you are a good scientist, you don't throw out data that you don't like. You find a way to fit it into your worldview, into your paradigm. So now I had this new data, and it wasn't just watching somebody else on stage. It was a personal experience. And so I had to figure that out. So I went to the ACEP conference in 2000. And I have actually been to every ACEP conference since. And so my first experience with the board was the board retreat in the fall of 2009. And back then it was decided at the retreat who would take what roles. And that's how and CEP was the certification committee. CEP certification committee was looking for a new chair. And that's how I had done some work with them already on the manuals. So I was familiar with that. And that I was very much interested in being on that committee. So I came onto the committee as the chair. I remained chair until almost up until the time that I took over the presidency in 2019. So I was able to find someone else to take over the chair. That's Sarah Zacharia, who's done a marvelous job. But I've certainly been very much involved in all of the activities for CEP. And now, of course, we have this really exciting new program that we're developing. We're putting most of the program online with live Zoom sessions and then one in-person workshop. And we're all just over the moon about this new program. It is fabulous.
Mhm.
You don't have to unlearn or let go of anything you already know. It just fits right into the protocol. So no matter what techniques you already know, or other ways of testing for field imbalance or whatever, all of those, everything you already know has a place in the protocol. It's just the protocol gives you a framework so that you can think about how to do things, and so that you don't miss important steps,
Mhm.
like checking to see if there are blocks in the way before you start a treatment. So as you can tell, I'm still as enthusiastic about CEP as I was when I first started.
Larry, you were one of the earlier presidents in the organization,
Right.
right? You had that fortune of pioneering the field for ACEP. So tell us a little bit about what it was like during your presidency. Where did you see ACEP, and relative to where it is now?
Right. So the pioneering term, I think, is not exactly applicable. And that's important because the pioneers were, founders. And those of us who came a bit after, like I did, we moved into an organization that was already rolling. Things were happening. Like, people were starting to hear about energy psychology. And, we were reaching people who were, all over the world really by then. And that was very exciting. But as an organization, a lot of our emphasis was, how do we make this conference, run and be great? And the conference was like the main moneymaker and was driving the organization. And so the question is, like, how do you move from a organization that's got all this beginning founding energy around something we all thought was really important, and allow it to sustain itself? So when I showed up, in terms of being president anyway, the tasks in front of us were, how do you make an organization be a sustainable, not-for-profit, organization that's going to have international reach? So really the thing that we did that was most important, that has since become, part of the fixture of ACEP, is have an executive director. So that was really a major change. The maturation of the field, developmental things that we were involved in, had to do with, like, the ethics code, and more importantly, attempts to start working with APA around getting CE credits. So, that was a big undertaking that we were involved in. So, these are, to me, like, the things that are kind of behind the scenes that members don't necessarily realize. Like, you really want to do these things because they're going to help with establishing credibility. And that was an ongoing concern that we had. So the point of this is, organizations like ours often have challenges at the board level, and trying to make sure that the board is functioning the way it should, and people are on board with what the purpose and direction of the organization is. So, there's growing pains. We had some of those. Other presidents had some of those. It just goes along with the territory of, how do you create a really high level functioning board with people who have outside commitments and other interests and other passions and so on. And, we all had very big vision about what we want to have happen. And, we do the best we can. So I think, like, the most exciting thing was what we were able to get started with the APA. That didn't come to fruition then, because they denied our application. But, things later on changed. And, so I like to say it takes years to do these sometimes. We're still less so now. I think energy psychology is finding its way into more established programs and more recognition. More and more people know about it. So, but then it was still very much an outsider effort. So I don't know. That's the main things I want to share. Maybe I'll say one more thing. If his name hasn't come up 100 times yet, it's going to. I feel a great debt of gratitude to Jim Klopman, who was really helpful to me, and gave me a lot of guidance and support in my learning how to function in a role like a president of an organization. So you need people like that who can give you honest feedback and help set you straight when you're maybe wondering a bit. So, I look at what happened after I was president and feel really good about that. People came in, put their mark on it, brought their gifts and their passions, and things continued. And, Bob has been executive director forever. So, I think stability in that role, having people with organizational knowledge and history in one person, it was really important that we made the change and he became executive director. The original person was not a really great fit for us long term. So you learn and grow from these things.
Everyone a little bit about your journey in ACEP, your path, how you came to ACEP, what your roles were, because you've had several.
I think I attended, before ACEP even existed, I attended 2 conferences in Las Vegas, because I just was, enthralled with the whole idea of this new technique and what it could do to me. even though my first experience with it, I had a partner who took me screaming and kicking that I thought this was all absurd. And then I tried it and it was like, wow, this stuff really works. We used to have a meet at the Wigwam and Mary Seiss at the pool talking, and all of a sudden she came up to me and she said, you know, I see you at this conference. I see you in Boston at the conferences. You know about this continuing ed stuff. Would you be education director? And of course, I didn't know what that entailed. And she kind of said, yeah, she downplayed it a little bit. No, it's a little bit of work, but you'll be fine. Well, it was a lot of work. But I did that's probably one of the most important pieces of where ACEP is today. So during my presidency, the two things that I think are outstanding is the beginning of the EFT certification. At that time, Gary Craig was thinking of retiring, and I had been in contact with him on multiple occasions, and he mentioned that Tina might not be ready to give it up. So I approached Tina and got that ball rolling, and initially it was a collaboration with Tina, and it was a lot of her ideas. Michael DiMolino was one of the trainers from its inception. And of course now it's a big part of ACEP. And the other thing that happened during my presidency was the development of the Wisdom Council. Mm-hmm. And how that came about is I was floundering to come up with closing remarks for one of the conferences, and maybe it was lazy, but I said, oh, why don't I ask all the past presidents to give their views on where ACEP is going? And that's what happened. So then, just decided that maybe it would be nice for presidents to be able to call on past presidents for, how they dealt with situations that were sticky, or just any way that past presidents could be of assistance to the current president. So my big joke was, you're president, you go to bed, and the next day you're supposed to be wise, but it worked. It worked. And yeah, so actually at that point is when term limits came into play. We were able to obtain continuing education actually before my presidency, but we were able to obtain continuing ed for psychologists, which was a big deal. It took a lot of years of work. A shout out to Larry Stoller and Greg Nicosia, because they worked diligently on that. And we finally got that. So all of you psychologists out there, please appreciate the hard work that went into getting that for you.
And John Freedom, he was part of that too.
Oh, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, John did a tremendous amount of work on that.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to bring up for people watching this, again, I think history is so important with respect to continuing education. And you mentioned me and about expanding the committee, and for a long time we had a quality assurance division, and we edited workshops after they were done, and gave presenters feedback. And this was it was a bittersweet job, which you were doing this too. And I just want to let everyone know why we did this. This was driven by the CE boards, and we really had to prove ourselves, as an organization and with our content. So that's why we put a lot of these things into place. And when you mentioned doing a lot of the board renewals, this isn't check a box and send a paper in.
Absolutely.
This is stringently vetting who was presenting, their credentials, what the language was in the proposals, in the presentation. So it was a lot of work. And I think sometimes when people hear education committee and, oh, I get to be on there and pick the proposals, that's the glamorous part, which you and I know that's not even always glamorous. And
correct. Even that is a lot more work than most people really.
There's a lot more work. We have hard decisions to make. And Bob just talked a little bit about the conference, and I mentioned in his segment that there's an art to putting all this together. So it's not necessarily just about that proposal and that presenter. It's about the big picture and what we value in ACEP. So you put a lot of heart and soul into that for a long time and fought for things that you thought were right for the good of the whole and the membership. So
Well,
thank you.
for that. Thank you for that. Like I said, I think that education has been one of the most important board positions of all, because if you have a conference and you're not giving continuing ed to as many people as expect to get it, then people aren't going to come. And the conference is not going to grow. And, people are just not going to be happy with what is offered. So, I think that people need to know that ACEP started out as a totally volunteer organization. I mean, the conference was probably half the size that it is currently, but the board pretty much did that. Everybody pitched in and did what needed to be done. Now, we would not have grown to the level we are now without Bob and the staff that we have. So that's not to diminish their role, but people come to the conference and I don't think they have any concept of what it takes to put on that kind of event. But from the feedback that we get from people who come, every bit of work is well worth it.
Dr. Bob, hi.
Hi, Mandy.
You've been the glue of ACEP. 15 years.
15 years.
You've kept
I'm
it
the
all
glue.
together.
So I started off on the board. So I was on the board for 3 years. And that's what happened. And as part of my duties on the board, at the time, there was no staff. I mean, the only thing ACEP was pretty much a group of people that did this, and they had a conference once a year. That was it. And we had a meeting planner who did that, it was her staff that did registration, and that's all there was. So I'm on the board and I'm looking at this and I'm seeing what this person is getting paid. And I'm going, for the kind of money that we're paying this meeting planner, we could have a part-time executive director who would plan the meetings, and then we'd have the executive director for the rest of the time. Long story short, that's what we ended up doing. It wasn't me. We hired somebody and it didn't work out. And actually I think it was Jim Klotman, was another board, suggested that I be executive director at the time. And I reflected on it and decided that it kind of met my leadership mission.
Yeah. So it's been a long journey since then.
Yes,
Tell
it has.
everybody out there, let's pick your brain a little bit for some things that you probably only have the expertise and the experience to tell everybody about ACEP. So through the years, maybe speak to a little bit of the evolutionary process of the changes behind the scenes, what you've brought to the table, and really what makes this organization tick.
On one level, what makes this organization tick is the hearts and the hopes of the people who are in the organization. The downside is that people tend to, it's all energy, and so people can see it, but making it happen in real time, that's another story. The metaphor I use is energy, light. You can have light. The sun is shining, beautiful, fantastic. But if you want to create something sharp that cuts through or it gets it, you need a laser. And so to get a laser, you have to focus the energy. And so what I think has been the journey for us in the back is to build the ability, the capacity to focus and harness the energy. And we have, over the years, just been, upping the level of that.
What do you think are some of the things that have happened during your reign as executive director that have been really monumental for ACEP?
Well, the most monumental thing, I have to say, absolute top, has been moving the dance from Sunday night when nobody was there to Saturday night. That is the single most monumental thing in all of ACEP. Single biggest thing, I think, for ACEP started back in 2007 when I was on the board and then continued as I was executive director. It's when we decided to engage the American Psychological Association to remove the ban on continuing education for psychologists for energy psychology, or thought field therapy at the time, which was, at that time, it was, the same as energy psychology. Now, this was important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it really was the beginning of a change of a mindset on the board of ACEP, that our job was to advocate for the entire field, and we could see ourselves as a force that could actually go up against the 600-pound gorilla known as the APA. So that was a really big deal. We take it for granted now, but back then that was an entire shift in mindset. And it took us almost 4 years and 4 tries, I think it was, which was another thing, because an important distinction, because in the beginning, we kind of had this sort of attitude that's not uncommon in fields as they're developing, kind of adolescent, going, well, I'm better than you, dad and mom, and that's sort of how we approached it. We're better, and here's how we're better, which of course the APA didn't like. And so that was a problem. And so by the 4th try, a couple of things had happened. One, there had been enough research, which was a big deal. Getting a lot of research, by the way, realizing that we needed research and actually making that happen. That wasn't just ACEP, that was a lot of people. That was a big turning point in the field. And then when we used that research, as well as taking a both in, like, we're part of you, like bridging, instead of saying we're better than you, we totally changed the attitude that I now call it the ACEP way. We want to bridge. We want to show how this connects with everything else. It's not so fundamentally different, actually. And when we finally, got it, that was a big deal, because, again, as I said, it was a total shift in our mindset, and not having this black mark was the beginning of a shift for many other people, because up until then, everybody would say, well, look, the APA thinks you're no good. So that was a really, really big deal. And a lot of things have, continued from that all the way up to, I don't know, I guess it was last year, we went and we convinced the Psychology Today people to list energy psychology on there as one of the modalities. That could never have happened if the APA had, continued to have that black mark. I would say moving online was a big deal. And that took a lot of, deciding to do it, figuring out how to do it, and then doing the Science of Energy Healing program, which really, which also added science too. That was a double great thing, adding the science to energy healing and energy psychology, and having an online presence, which we have till today. So ACEP is a thought leader in the world. You comes from ACEP. You can trust it. It's solid. That's something that we really want and want to continue to have. And we want to have fun too, of course.
And it all comes together, the space for everybody, and everybody, interacts really well. It's home. People say that all the time, feeling at home at ACEP. So it's a great place.
That's not fluff. That is the modal comment that we hear. We hear it at the conference, because that's where you get to have the individual people, and some people walk up and go, it's unbelievable. I didn't know you guys existed. I feel like I'm home.
What's your vision for ACEP? What would you like to see in the future?
But we want to work as much as we can on a systemic level. But I would say that, we want to grow. We want to have a bigger impact. That's the thing. I want to reach more people, whether they be licensed or unlicensed. Because of my position, I see, and maybe others don't, is that we sort of live in a bit of a bubble. The people that do this work, know this work, believe this work, get the power of it. And it's like so obvious. But the fact of the matter is, to a lot of people, it's still not obvious at all. And so we need to, be mindful of that and reach out, be smart and strategic, and get and influence people. It takes time. The phrase I like is, I like to quote the play Hamilton. I want to be in the room where it happens. And there's a lot of rooms where it happens, whatever it is. Whether it's a hospital trying to do stuff, or just, there's a lot of rooms where it happens. So we need to reach out to more of those folks and think about that, not just think about one client at a time. Not that that's not important. We got that covered. You know what? Another thing that speaks to before I just said and what you just said is The humanitarian committee also has done some pretty amazing things, and they've created, there are two things that I'm very excited about. One is the R4R videos, resources for resilience. So these are videos, for those that don't know, that anybody can access from anywhere. You just need a phone. And so, again, for scalability, the scalability, deliverability of an impact, this is, I think, a big deal, and is only just, I don't think we've even begun to see the potential payout for this. So I'm very excited about that, and hopefully we can do even more. So that's one thing. And they're also doing, and there's a training program that goes along with about how to use these videos too. So again, pretty cool. And then the other thing is there's a subcommittee about dealing with schools. And I just think that that's another area that we need to really focus on, is drive this down younger in school, especially in younger schools. And we also have a program where it's just finished, and now we're working on figuring out how to get it out into the world, but a program for a grad school program for energy psychology. So that's another thing that, okay, we've made it good, but now it's got to get out in there and be in, 100, be offered 100 times a year throughout various places. So we got a ways to go, but I'm excited about that too. So there's a lot of possibility for the future.
I want to give one more shout out, and that's to John Freedom, who has built a lot of our resources and compiled them for the website. And that's like my number one thing I use the website for, is to send people there to look at the research. There's a lot of places with lots of lists of EFT research, but we have the comprehensive research, and that's
EFT,
really been developed.
TFT, other things. Yep. AIT. Well, no, HAT. Yeah. 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 John's done an unsung hero. He's done an amazing job, and he pulls all kinds of stuff, and he's a dedicated volunteer, and he works effective at a high level. So shout outs to John. Anybody else want to work at his level, you're more than invited.
Lori, you are a force of fierce femininity. So as this is going to be a historical documentary for ACEP, unique to your tenure as president of ACEP, the COVID years, can you tell us about ACEP during that time?
It was quite a shock to be in COVID and be in the, training and being part of presidency. Obviously, everything moved online. We had to pivot very quickly. We had a lot of experience already with live stream for the conference. So thankfully, that wasn't a new learning curve for us. But of course, the personal contact that we love so much, getting together for the conferences, wasn't going to be there in the same way. So we had to get very creative, and it was challenging to not get burned out, to not feel isolated. Everyone was going through their own experience with that. And then to be in a leadership position while that was happening, I used all the techniques that I had learned and then some to kind of keep myself healthy and forward thinking, because it's easy to get caught into a negative kind of mindset. I really relied on the team of other people around me, and staying as much as I could in my heart, and using personal guidance. I did a lot of that to kind of help guide, But the good news, of course, is that we stayed open, and we kept our membership up, and we kept our activities going, even though things kind of did shrink for a bit. And then, of course, last year we were able to be in person again, back in New Mexico at this magical place. And so it's not over, but whew, we got through a big piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly looked flawless on the opposite end.
Okay.
The first year, I remember thinking this was just amazing. It was pulled together really well. I know there was a lot of work on the back end to do that, but that was great. And moving forward with ACEP, I believe this happened during your tenure, that we started looking at the graduate course in EP.
Yeah, it started before I came aboard. There were people who were talking for a long time about, the next generation, and how are we going to keep this momentum going? We have, now we're at 25 years, but we were building our years experience and training people. But if we don't have younger people learning and enjoying and understanding what the benefits are, then the field dies. So when I came on board, I decided that was going to be my primary goal, to try to launch that and get that going. And so working very closely with Bob Schwartz, we came up with criteria for opening an application for people to write the course, and we wound up going with Dr. Peter Stapleton in Australia, and she has completed the first pilot of the course now. It's done. And we're looking to run it through some other opportunities so we can get feedback. And then the goal is to launch it and to have it available for master's and PhD mental health programs. So not undergrad and not outside of mental health yet. It's an academic program. It is not, you don't walk away learning how to, but it's what and why, mostly, with a little bit of hands-on exposure. So as an elective, hopefully, for graduate students, so they can start to understand what this is all about and then use it with their clients in their practices and research and whatever applications that they have.
Yeah, excellent. Diversity is very important to ACEP. We've talked about diversity in modalities and techniques, but also in our membership and how we reach populations that might not have access to tools like this. What would you like to see for the future of ACEP with respect to diversity?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's not just who's there, but access to information and materials, representation. This is something that was not part of my academic training, really, in grad school so many years ago. And consciousness is changing and awareness is changing. And I think that ACEP was formed with an older model in mind and based in psychology. And so I think it's time to up our game and to broaden our perspectives and look at how we can connect with different sorts of groups, whether it's people who are differently abled or whatever it is, different worldviews, cultures, perspectives, and adaptation of energy psychology principles and procedures for different communities. And so it's not so easy to do that with only enthusiasm. It takes dedication and it takes community building and trust and takes time, but it's not an impossible goal. And so I'm hoping that in the future we will see more of this. Yeah.
So if you had a pipe dream for ACEP, 10, 20 years, a pipe dream, right? Down the road, what would you look? Because we know that that's actually, right, we just manifest it. So it's not really, let's manifest it now. What do you see happening in 20 years? What would you like to see happening? Where would you see ACEP going?
I'm hoping that the whole concept, Peter Stapleton talks about the fourth wave. So maybe we'll be on to the fifth or sixth wave by then. I'd like to see that ACEP is pushing past boundaries, looking at honoring where we are and where we've come from, but also looking at what's innovative, what's new, and what's vital for human potential and alleviating suffering. And I would hope that our fourth wave is, meaning the mind-body practices, are much more commonly established and shared in general, but that we move on to things like looking at spirituality and essence and integrity and humanitarian values that we espouse now through our work around the world, but to have it be more integrated, not just with technique and theory and protocols, but a more humanistic, heart-based approach, that incorporates all of these things. So, I mean, it's hard to know in 20 years what's going to happen, but that's a potential.
Mm-hmm. Pam, I know you a long time. So let's start by talking about, what do you love about ACEP? What makes ACEP unique?
ACEP is this family of people, this group of people that all have this, or all have had this quest to find the best techniques to help people. And I think that we're all pioneers, and that we didn't care about, what we wanted. All we wanted is to help people. And so we were gonna really open our brains and our minds so that we could be open to finding techniques that best help people. So I feel like ACEP is this family, this like-minded group that are all on this mission to best be of service to people, especially people who've had trauma. I mean, there are other things too, of course, all negative emotions and negative beliefs and things like that. But, you know, PTSD just became a diagnosis in like the 1980s when I was first beginning to be a psychotherapist. And talk therapy just wasn't cutting the mustard, it wasn't working. And so, me and a lot of other people like me in ACEP all just moved towards trying to find these techniques that all of a sudden dropped into our life. You know, I think people don't really consider neurolinguistic programming energy psychology technique, but I think it was sort of the foundation of things. And then, or maybe it was in the morphic field, but it was NLP, and then, you know, soft field therapy, TAT, then, you know, EFT and VSET free fast and all these techniques that just kind of came. And so anyway, I love ACEP because we're all on this mission together.
Yeah. And it really shows in your heart that you love ACEP and you're really loyal to this organization. One of the things that people watching may not know about you is that you had a very big role in membership for a long time. Yeah. And recruiting new members and connecting with people all over the world. Tell everybody out there a little bit about your experience with membership and maybe what some of your future visions are and dreams for membership for ACEP.
As president, though, I am looking out at all of us. And unfortunately, the majority of us are baby boomers. And I am super concerned that ACEP's mission will not continue unless we get some vibrant, enthusiastic young people into membership, into ACEP, into the communities, into leadership. We really, really need young people to help us lead into the future. We also really need people of diversity. We do have some people of diversity on the board now, but it's too small. We need many more members infusing ACEP, and we need to welcome people of diversity, make them feel safe and comfortable, and then they can take energy psychology to their communities. So the other thing that I really want to attract besides young people and people of diversity is a little bit more men, just to have some balance. And then I'd be really happy if we had that. And of course, more members. And I'm not prejudiced against baby boomers since I am a baby boomer myself. So more baby boomers is still good. But we do need, if we're going to thrive and survive in the future, we need younger people.